Hello and welcome to Connect and Collaborate. I'm Alex Hopkins, your on-air producer, and we are checking in with DORA, Colorado. That's the Department of Regulatory Agencies, and I have the Director of Communications in studio with me, Rebecca Laurie. How are you doing?
Good. How are you, Alex?
Wonderful. It's been a while.
It has been a little while, and it's
Yeah.
always so nice to see you and always so
Yes.
nice to be here.
Yes, it's always great to have you. And I know over the holidays, it's really hard to get people in here, and then, winter, and nobody wants to get out, and it's gross outside.
Yes.
So we always appreciate you coming in, but this month is really special.
It
this
is.
week, actually.
Yes, this month and this week is special. It's special because it is National Consumer Protection Week, and Governor Polis has declared, or proclaimed rather, that this week is National Consumer Protection Week in Colorado. And essentially what National Consumer Protection Week is where dozens of federal, state, and local agencies get together and really push out tips, information, just good advice on how consumers can be more aware, better informed, and therefore have more resources in their pocket so they can, be able to protect their families and themselves when they're out and operating in the marketplace.
Yeah, with more technology, I feel like more people feel like there's a lot more information to take in.
Yes.
And there's a lot more research you need to do. But what I like is that you bring me people that, narrow that down. What do I need to look for? Mm-hmm. Where are my resources?
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think how we tend to approach it in the consumer protection fields and the regulatory fields is that we want to assume that there are, the majority of people are good actors in the marketplace. The majority of businesses and individuals have the best interest of the consumer in mind, but there are going to be some of those bad actors. There's really, as we have learned through history, no getting around that. And so to be able to recognize the signs from about some of those issues or red flags is really important for consumers so they are not, fleeced out of their money or spending their time unnecessarily. And then ultimately, if it does happen, having the resources and the information to know where to turn for help. And there are, and that's what we're here to talk about today.
Yes. So tell me who you have to talk about this.
Well, we have some very special guests. We have Ezra Coopersmith, who is with the Better Business Bureau, serving Greater Denver and Central Colorado. Ezra is the investigations coordinator at the BBB. His primary role is to bring information about scams and problem businesses to Coloradans. It involves overseeing the Denver section of the BBB scam tracker, which he'll talk about a little bit more, and partnering with the businesses themselves, as well as consumers and government agencies like us. So these types of unethical practices are brought to light, and, the businesses who are, really operating on a fair playing field are rewarded. And then we have Jill Sarmo with the Division of Securities at DORA. Jill's been on the show several times. She does education and outreach for the Division of Securities, but she really also has become, a broader voice for financial consumer protection. She works very closely on the Senior Safety Act and works with financial institutions all over the state and other agencies to help bring awareness about the different types of financial frauds that those financial institutions need to be aware of.
Okay, so not only are you giving information to consumers, you're also giving information to businesses and entities, organizations that need to know about these scams as well.
That's right. Exactly.
Cool.
So I think, we'll start off with Ezra, since he's the new guy, right? I'm kidding.
Jill's old hat.
Yeah, that's right.
Been here a bunch
You've
of
heard
times.
me before. Ezra, a lot of people know about the Better Business Bureau. It's an organization that you go to when you want to look up a business rating. But what are some of the other services that the Bureau offers?
Yeah, so
or
that
the
is...
BBB, rather.
Yeah, we have to be hip and modern, so we're not the Better Business Bureau, we're BBB.
BBB.
No, so a lot of people know of the Better Business Bureau as a place, you go if you want to, look up a business's letter grade. But a lot of the things that we do behind the scenes that aren't quite as obvious to consumers happen in the realm of either, consumer protection or working with businesses to try to help them be the best that they can be. Because ultimately, as I'm sure we talk about all the time, preventing fraud is just as much about the good actors as it is about the bad actors. And so that includes, good consumers who want to look out for each other, but that also includes good businesses who want to look out for people who are, ultimately their customers, but also might be susceptible to fraud. So some of the things that we do, Rebecca, you mentioned our scam tracker program. That's, this relatively new program that we have. It's been around since, I want to say, mid-2015. And I can talk about it a bit later, but it's essentially this online crowdsourced way to track scams. And for consumers, that gives a lot of information about what's going on maybe in your neighborhood in terms of fraud, but also on the back end, internally, we collect a ton of data around what consumers are facing really throughout North America. We also offer dispute resolution services. So if you have an issue with a business, it's one thing to go online and write a negative review. It's another thing to actually say, maybe this is a misunderstanding. Ultimately, we'd like to hope that most businesses want to do the right things by consumers, and that is something that we see. So we have an enormous dispute resolution program where consumers can come to us and say, hey, I had this issue with a business. I'm not necessarily right now getting the resolution that I think is fair. And we actually work with both the business and the consumer to ultimately bring about some sort of resolution. And then we report that so that other consumers can see, hey, it looked like this other person had this issue, but wow, look at all the things that the business did to make it right. Or, on the contrary, it's rare, but look at how terribly this went for this consumer. Maybe this isn't the reputable business that I might think it is. We also offer mediation and arbitration sessions for very escalated disputes. And then finally, we do a lot to try to bring consumer issues to light. So we offer alerts and warnings and try to bring stories into the local news about issues that we think consumers need to know about. We do things like this where we'll go on television or on radio and try to educate consumers. And then on the business end, we also do a lot. So we offer basically sessions in our office trying to educate businesses about how best they can market themselves and present themselves to consumers, about how to do things the ethical way. And then we also, we think of ourselves as a community organization, and we try to stress to businesses that one of the things that we look for in our relationship is that not only can we help them do things the ethical way, can we help them, make the most of their business, but we also ask in return that businesses communicate with us. And if they see something sketchy happening in their industries, hopefully they bring it to us or anybody else in the consumer protection arena, so that hopefully, no one has to deal with those issues, whether it's a consumer who's susceptible or it's a business that's affected negatively.
And I would imagine, really, again, for those of us who are in the consumer protection arena, really what those agencies are looking for are systemic issues, right?
Right.
Trends and systemic issues in which there are clear markers for the consumers to watch out for. The other issue is, of course, kind of the one-off issue that somebody might have with a particular business. And I think any business owner, my father was a small business owner, can understand that communications issues happen. Maybe lack of clear understanding between the business transaction happens. And sometimes the two people are speaking completely kind of like different frame of reference. Yeah. And so they do need somebody like, the BBB to step in and really unpackage what the real issue is, mm-hmm. and come to that type of resolution. And I think that's a service really truly for the business as well as to the consumer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think that is an enormous aspect of hopefully what our organization can offer consumers in the area of education. So, like I said, we have the scam tracker program, which is really designed to report fly-by-night scams. But roughly half of the reports that we get, which we don't publish, are from consumers who, they say, hey, there is this, this store on, down the street, and they are a scam, and you need to tell everybody that they're a scam. But when we look into what actually happened and go to the business will say, oh my goodness, we didn't know that this person even had this issue. This is a customer service issue. We want to make it right. And so in those cases, we really urge, putting the consumer and the business in contact so that they can resolve what really isn't this separate issue, which is fraud, which absolutely happens and we do a ton to deal with. But that distinction is really important to make, because there are actors out there whose goal is just to steal someone's money and disappear, but there are also genuine disputes or just misunderstandings in the marketplace that happen every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say, just to kind of pop in and from the financial industry, I mean, we see a lot that a number that I cite a lot is that 80% of the people in the securities industry who are dealing with investments, 80% of the scams that happen are from unlicensed people. So these are people who, they're not actually in the industry. They are basically just fraudsters. And so those are the ones that, are really targeting people and everything. Not to say, again, that it doesn't happen within the industry, but the main, bulk of the people who are perpetrating these frauds, these investment frauds on people, are unlicensed. And so, I mean, that's kind of, it's like there's that distinction. When you have somebody in the industry and there has been a misunderstanding or there's been some sort of issue, then it's a lot easier for us to work with the licensed folks and put them in contact with the investor and make sure that they can sort of talk through what happened, as opposed to the ones that are just like they're trying to fly under the radar. They're not licensed for a reason, and they're the ones that are going to be perpetrating the fraud.
So let's talk a moment about the scam index you referenced.
Okay.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I mentioned our scam tracker program, which is, again, it's essentially this online program. It's live throughout North America, so not just in the U.S., but also in Canada and Mexico. And it's a place where consumers essentially can go and report instances of fraud. Every report gets vetted internally before it's published, because, like I said, occasionally we get reports that a consumer thinks is absolutely fly-by-night fraud, and it turns out it's actually just a business that made a mistake. But what it creates is essentially this map, and you can look at it online. Anyone can. You just go to bbb.org/scam tracker, or more realistically, just Google the word scam tracker, and it's the first link. I don't think I've ever navigated to the site in any other way. But what you see as a consumer is essentially this map, and it almost looks like Google Maps, but you see these little bubbles with numbers in them, and those bubbles indicate scams and scam reports that have happened, and you can zoom in really far down to essentially the neighborhood level, and you can see what scams are being reported where. And then you have the option to click on any individual one, and it'll give you information like, what the person said happened, how much money they lost, where they're from. I believe you see the payment method, which is often really relevant to different types of scams. So that's, a consumer resource that we urge people to use. The other aspect to it is that aside from what, you might see if you Google scam tracker and look at the reports, internally, BBB just collects an enormous amount of data, not only to do with the reports that we actually publish for people to see, but we ask for other information like demographic info and some more detailed information like how much people, give versus how much they were asked. And what we get from that over the years of just accumulating this information is really a picture of what fraud looks like in North America and who's falling for it, when, how. And that's something that we compile every year. And actually, the full, what we call the Scam Tracker Risk Index, which is a study of all the data from a given year, that study for 2018 is about to come out during Consumer Protection Week, the first week in March. and we're really excited. But we already have some idea of what that data looks like based on last year's data, which is, for the full year of 2017.
I want to ask, you mentioned that the payment method is important to know. Why is that?
So payment method is always important because, for one thing, it gives you a window into, I guess it gives you a look into the what the scammer is after.
Okay.
But it's also important because when it comes to actually recovering your money or what kind of damage the scam can do, payment method is extremely important. So as an example, if you end up being victim to a scam and you pay in prepaid gift cards, there's no getting that back. Whereas if you use the credit card, it's actually pretty easy to get that money back. So that's incredibly relevant when it comes to the nature of the scam and assessing how damaging it is.
Awesome. So even if I use, say, my credit card to buy those prepaid gift cards, still pretty risky, I would imagine.
Yeah, that's a tricky question. I don't think I've ever come across. I believe you would be able to report that as fraud.
Okay.
And get it back.
Good to know, just for people out there. Yeah, because
It's a valid question. If you buy gift cards on a credit card and then you give those gift cards away, it doesn't necessarily matter who you've given it away to.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, you might be able, because if you have your receipts on your credit card statement, you might still be able to get some back.
Yeah, I think you should be able to still
They
report that as fraud.
investigate it.
Yeah.
They really do.
They do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
So one other thing that I thought when we were talking that you brought up that was really interesting is this whole concept that consumer protection is really a community effort. It's not, bad guy versus good guy or good guy versus bad guy and, something like you would see on TV. There are a lot of, again, reputable businesses that have very much in mind wanting to make sure that their marketplace stays fair because it is to their best interest and they want to keep the industry reputable. So talk about that a little bit more if you could, Ezra, and you as well, Jill, if you'd like.
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously an important aspect of combating fraud is going after bad actors. And that's invaluable. It helps hold people accountable. But another element to it is, just at BBB, we get just so many scam tracker reports or just calls from consumers every day. And realistically, it's impossible to hold every bad actor accountable, based on the sheer volume of scams that happen every day. And also the fact that often it is untraceable, or at least difficult to trace. Often you have people scamming, people from overseas or sending payment through methods like wire transfers, which it's just really difficult to get back. So instead, we like to look at scam prevention as more of a community endeavor in the sense that it's about people talking about fraud. It's about neighbors and friends looking out for each other and talking through financial decisions and purchase decisions. Often what we find is that victims of scams will have not reported it for a really long time or not have talked through the decision with somebody before, making a fraudulent purchase because there's this stigma attached to falling for a scam. For one thing, people think that it makes them seem dumb, and then often the nature of the scam is one where it deals with very sensitive information. So it might be somebody, pretending to, claiming that they have like private embarrassing information on you. It might be related to employment and somebody is ashamed that they've, fallen on tough times. Any number of things. We see that a lot with romance scams. And what we want to do is destigmatize this idea that because you've fallen for a scam or because you're considering doing something that might end up being a scam, you're somehow dumb and should be ashamed. Because ultimately, for one thing, the only way to actually go after bad actors is for people to report fraud so that law enforcement or BBB or really any other organization knows that it's happening. And then also, so much fraud essentially can be prevented if people are out there looking out for each other and are willing to talk through these often kind of embarrassing or tough decisions with people. And then finally, our whole picture of what consumer fraud looks like really comes from almost all self-reported data. And so that's why, we stress to people, even if you've already been victimized, it's invaluable for you to talk to law enforcement, talk to anyone, and report that fraud.
Yeah, I think, one of the stats that I say a lot, that I give a lot when I give presentations, is the FBI reports that it's estimated that only 1 in 44 instances of financial frauds or scams are actually ever making it to any type of authority, whether it's law enforcement or regulators. So that's just a huge, I think, in terms of trying to combat this, it's a huge issue for us. And I'll just say anecdotally, I have a friend who, she's, in her early 30s. She's super smart. She's very well educated. She's, a professional in the state. And I really appreciated the other week because I saw she posted on social media, hey, I feel really stupid doing this, but I want to say something about it because, I want to make it known to everybody. She had fallen for the sort of like false fake warrant scam.
Yeah.
And she just said, she's like, I was coming back from a business trip. I was super tired. I was in a really bad mood. I got a call that said I had missed jury duty and that in order to, settle it, I needed to pay this fine. So before I even could really think about it rationally, I fired off $500, and she's like, luckily that's all it was. But I really appreciated the fact that she wasn't too embarrassed to share that story because I think that's what we need to sort of destigmatize the issue because really it's just about hitting people in the right moment.
Well, and that was a big story by the Denver Police Department last week or a couple weeks ago. And they were out doing whatever they could to help people understand that that was a common scam that's been really going through the metro area lately.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I don't know more about that particular scam and kind of the origins of who's calling, kind of how organized it is, but it's definitely on law enforcement radar. And then the other thing that just came out recently was the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's report that suspicious activity reports on elder fraud are significantly up. Now, I don't know if it's significantly up because there's more fraud, which I think, I think Ezra, doing some of the data could say probably yes, it's up. But also I think that there are more resources, easier resources to report it now. And so that also might be why it's up.
Yeah, you don't have to admit to a lot of people, and as much as you want to destigmatize it, which I agree with, you should get it out there, let people know that you got scammed so they can be prevented from being scammed. But at the same time, now you have these platforms, I can just go online and say I was scammed. I don't have to really share it with a bunch of people and who do I need to contact and
yeah, if you don't want to broadcast it on social media, you don't have to. You can go and report it, confidentially. But
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I should note that our scam tracker program is growing every year in use. And that's taking into account that we also have this helpline where people can call and talk to someone in person. But what we're finding is that, because often I will reach out to people who have filed reports, and what they say is, I don't want to talk about this, but I just wanted to get it out there so that it's on someone's radar. And they're very thankful for the fact that they can just report something and not have to put themselves out there. It can be anonymous.
Well, tell me, we have just a minute here left. Where can I put this information? Where can I find more information?
So I would urge you to visit bbb.org, where you can, you have a ton of options. You can report fraud. You can find articles involving really all of these nationwide studies that we do with the scam tracker data that we compile or, other research. I also would say visit the Stop Fraud Colorado site. That's the website for the consumer protection branch of the Attorney General's office, as well as DORA's website. And also you should follow all of those entities on social media because we're constantly posting things and retweeting each other's posts about, the most pertinent information that consumers need.
Awesome. Thank you. In addition to doing that, be sure to like and subscribe our YouTube page while you're here. We'll be right back on Connect and Collaborate. Stay with us. Welcome back to Connect and Collaborate. Once again, I'm Alex Hopkins, your on-air producer, and we have Rebecca Laurie in studio with DORA, Colorado, that is the Department of Regulatory Agencies, and we are talking about National Consumer Protection Week.
Yes, so Governor Polis has proclaimed this week as National Consumer Protection Week in Colorado. There are a lot of consumer protection type of organizations that are out there working on this behalf, locally, federally. We have DORA, who is a consumer protection agency, as well as the BBB, who is a consumer protection agency here with us. The BBB is a not-for-profit, and it tries to strengthen the trust between buyers and sellers, and they partner with public and private sectors and educate consumers, as well as work on empowering businesses by offering trainings and sessions in arbitration and mediation, which we heard about in the past session with Ezra Coopersmith, who is here joining us. And then we have Jill Sarmo joining us from DORA's Division of Securities, who does a tremendous amount of education and outreach, working both with consumers directly and businesses, particularly in the financial industry. So we're really glad to have these two experts with us to talk about consumer fraud, which affects not only consumers but also can affect businesses as well.
Exactly, because once you're scorned as a consumer, you kind of swear off certain businesses.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So we work together a lot. Our services complement each other, and so Jill, can you talk a little bit about what you do to partner with organizations like the BBB specifically to make sure that consumers and businesses are really aware of the services that are offered?
Sure. Well, I love National Consumer Protection Week because it gives us the opportunity to sort of showcase these partnerships. Last year, we actually were on this program with Stop Fraud Colorado, so I'm glad Ezra mentioned them, with the Attorney General's office. They're the Consumer Protection section. And so this year, in order to showcase another one of our great partnerships, we wanted to have the BBB on. I think, as Ezra talked about, the community aspect and this sort of everybody needs to be involved in looking out for each other and sort of making sure that we make everyone aware of what's happening is really important. And so the partnership aspect of consumer protection is really important on the part of people who are working in the space every day. So I just wanted to talk about a couple of the really important ways that we do collaborate with the BBB. Recently, in the last couple of years, we've started doing quarterly meetings between DORA and the BBB so that we can get together and talk about, we do quarterly meetings not only for outreach to talk about kind of our approach to consumer protection and getting the word out, outreach and talking about scams and stuff, but the BBB also does a great job of hosting, roundtables where we can get together and talk about these common scams that are out there, trends that we're seeing, and people that are in the space are seeing, so that we can kind of let people know whether it's on the industry side or the consumer side. So it's really nice to even have these internal conversations with each other so that we can then take that message out to the public. Another thing that Ezra mentioned is that we are all on social media. That's the best, quickest way these days to get the word out about scams that we're seeing. And just the general consumer protection message. So one thing I wanted to mention this week, there's going to be a scam chat happening on Twitter. So this is something that actually the Better Business Bureau that services Wyoming and Northern Colorado is hosting. They host it on Twitter under the hashtag scam chats. So it is hashtag SCAMCHATS, and we're going to be jumping on there on this Thursday at 1 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, and talking about just a lot of the scams that are out there. The BBB's new report is just out, and so they're going to be talking about all these common trends, and we're going to be jumping in with our own consumer protection information. And so I think, these are just some of the many ways that we kind of partner together and that we really work to get the word out and make sure that we're covering all the bases when it comes to protecting people in Colorado and elsewhere.
So one of the things we talked about during the break was real stories. Mm-hmm. We talk a lot about how to prevent fraud, the different resources, but what are we looking at in terms of real stories of fraud and scams?
I think from the Division of Securities perspective, again, we are primarily working within the investment fraud space. And something that we talk about a lot that continues to be an issue, and that I think kind of branches out beyond even the investment realm, is the affinity fraud aspect. So affinity fraud is what occurs when somebody will infiltrate a group of people that have some sort of shared interest, some commonality, whether it's an ethnicity, a religious organization, or even just like an interest. Like, so we've heard of people going into book clubs and pitching investments to entire groups of people that consider themselves friends, and then everybody falls for it. And so they kind of exploit that sense of trust that happens within a group of people in order to sort of perpetrate this scam on multiple people at once. And I think, it's something that we see in multiple realms, and it's also the reason why talking about these things is so important, because if that sense of trust is exploited, it really does affect people even beyond their bank account. So even if they lose a couple $1,000s or more than that, what the real damage that gets done is your sense of, I had a friend that I trusted and they did this to me, and I thought we could trust each other, and so it's really that emotional damage that gets done when something like this happens. So I don't know if anybody else has a story about it. I have a couple that I could share that we've worked with recently. Yeah. So another one of the sort of trendy scams, unfortunately, what I would have to call it recently, is in the cryptocurrency space. So people are getting a lot more kind of savvy about seeing these kind of scams, and especially since Bitcoin, has had the kind of fall from grace over the last year. It's not quite as common, but we are still seeing scams out there. And the intersection between a cryptocurrency scam and affinity fraud that we saw recently was there was a church group where somebody who was part of the church was going around and pitching, saying that he could get people discounted Bitcoin. And so he was collecting just checks. I mean, people were just writing him checks for thousands and thousands of dollars that he was claiming he would purchase Bitcoin, and, just pocketing it. And so, it's hard because the people who we tried to speak to about this, who had lost the money, they were still, like, a lot of them didn't want to speak to us because they were still so convinced, like, it's just taking him a little bit longer, like, he's our friend, he wouldn't steal from us. And so it was really hard to get people to talk to us because they were still so convinced that this was going to come to fruition and that, something was going to come through for them.
What was the timeline on that as far as when it was reported and they were still thinking they were going to make some money?
It was probably a couple of months. So it hadn't been a super long time, which, sometimes it does just take that time for things to sort of settle in and for people to realize, oh man, it's really gone. But I think, in being in the space where we're trying to make people aware of fraud and get people to talk to us in order to build a case against somebody in a situation like this, that is one of the biggest uphill challenges for us, is that, sometimes it's hard to just wrap your mind around the fact that you did get scammed. And so people often, as opposed to some other crimes that happen, people are a lot more hesitant to cooperate, a lot more hesitant to sort of come forward because they just don't want to believe that the money that they gave was gone.
Oh, absolutely. And again, from a friend.
Right.
From a community that I've gone to for a really long time.
Yeah. I would say the common sort of chorus we hear with pretty much every case we work is, I can't believe, he or she would do this to me. Like, I trusted him, I thought we were friends. I thought, we had a better relationship than this. I thought he was a better person than this,
So the lesson is, when a friend is trying to invest on your behalf, that should be a red flag.
Or, it should be something that is not in and of itself sufficient reason to do something. You should always go and do your homework above and beyond what somebody is telling you. So even if it's a friend or a family member or a church member or something like that, and you really feel like you can trust them, going and making sure, especially when it comes to investments, that it's properly registered. Make sure that it's listed online. You can go to the SEC's website, so it's investor.gov. You can go and look up securities professionals, make sure that somebody's actually licensed to be promoting or selling whatever product that they're pitching to you. And then you can also look up the product and make sure that it's either registered or that, it's kind of in the proper space. And for anybody who ever has questions about that, we encourage them to call the Division of Securities, because we know sometimes it can be a little bit confusing. But especially when you're in the realm of investments, it can involve people's life savings. And so doing your due diligence and not just relying on that unfortunate, what has to be blind trust with friends, is really important when you're dealing with large sums of money.
And it's the whole reason why these investment professionals are licensed.
Yes.
They get very specific education. They understand the laws and the requirements, the disclosures that are required. And if you are just operating through a friend, you're not fully informed. Typically, working with a licensed professional and making sure that that licensed professional is above grade is really the best course of action when it comes to your money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially if your friend has a day job, right?
Yeah.
You know what they do for a living, and all of a sudden they're asking you to invest in something.
Which may seem like a sure thing when pitched.
Exactly.
Sure.
And so then you say to them, well, who gave you this information, right? You need to start asking those questions too. I want to ask you, is there a difference between this and a pyramid scheme, so to speak?
Go ahead.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Well, I was actually going to bring in pyramid schemes as an example of one of the things Jill touched on, which is that, scammers aren't just good at what they do because they're clever when it comes to tricking people or how financial institutions handle money. They're really good at understanding how people make decisions and how to manipulate them. And so one of the tricks that we see a lot with, say, affinity scams is that when we ask people who have fallen for scams, what was influential in making their decision, one of the things we hear a lot is the perception that other people are either making money or gaining some benefit, and that you're going to miss out on that. So we see that a lot when it comes to pyramid schemes. Often in the multi-level marketing space, there are some legitimate multi-level marketing companies, but often there are companies that are actually pyramid schemes that disguise themselves as multi-level marketing. And then we also, the internet is a really important tool when it comes to bringing people together, and that's given scammers the opportunity to exploit the fact that we don't want to miss out on things that our friends are doing into spaces where you can still be on your own, but see, Jill mentioned Bitcoin. There are so many articles about people getting rich in Bitcoin, and, you can sit at your computer and own a yacht a year from now just by trading Bitcoin. None of it's true, but there's a perception that you're missing out. One of the areas where we see that a lot is when it comes to fraud that has to do with like diet pills or skin creams, what we call the health and diet industries, where there's this one type of fraud that we see over and over again with different companies, where you sign up for what you think is a free trial of a product, you give your credit card information, and then you unknowingly buy into what is a continuity program, where you're basically billed $100 a month until you can find a way to cancel it. But really the common denominator for a lot of these scams is the idea that, if you don't take action, are going to miss out on this thing that everybody else in your group or in your social network is benefiting from.
Yeah, that's in the consumer protection industry, we call that the social consensus piece.
Right.
So it's the idea that, when you drive, and it's used in legitimate marketing. So when you drive down the street and you see McDonald's and they've got the sign that says 1 billion burgers sold, that implies to you that there's something really special about these hamburgers, if 1 billion people are eating them. And so it's that idea that it's like, ooh, what am I missing out on? It's just this sort of innate draw that we have within us. So,
well, and one thing to mention is that again, anybody can be susceptible, even those of us who work in the consumer protection space. I think I consider myself really well educated about this stuff, but I fell for an online scam. I was doing a search on e-bikes, and I think Ezra could probably highlight this a little bit more, but with analytics that are available to so many people, there are companies out there who know what you're searching for, mm-hmm. and are able to target you directly, giving you essentially exactly what you were looking for an incredible price, absolutely incredible price.
Yeah.
So much cheaper than anything you may have seen. And in the moment, you think, this is amazing.
What a good deal.
I found
Yeah.
exactly what I wanted, and
Yeah.
I'm getting an incredible deal. So I did that with an e-bike, and I received a confirmation email that my credit card had been charged, and that was it. I never heard from them again. Of course, I filed something immediately with the credit card company. It was resolved after they looked into it.
Good.
You know, it was fairly painless the moment I realized I was taken. But let me tell you, somebody who even works, it was just the right place, right time. I was looking. It seemed like a reputable online marketplace, but it was a cover page.
Yeah.
It was a cover page and a scam. Just anyone is susceptible.
You've just highlighted kind of the more modern, what the sort of advancement of technology has allowed people to do. You know, even it still happens, but a few years ago, you know, what was common and what we would caution people against was with cold calls. You know, we would always tell people, you know, if somebody calls you on the phone and you answer, and this happens a lot with older populations, with the senior population, a lot of times people will say, oh, I just talked to them. You know, I'm not actually going to buy anything. I'm not actually going to invest or anything like that. But what we always would caution people is the more information you provide about yourself, even if you think you're just doing it in a casual manner, you know, you're just talking, they're going to, I mean, again, these people are experts and they're going to use that against you because they're going to, you know, use something that you're interested in, you know, even when it happens in a digitized form, to kind of narrow their focus and narrow their pitch in a way that, you know, is going to be appealing to you. So we had a case a couple years ago of this woman who she would answer the phone. She was just kind of a lonely older woman. Her husband had recently died. She and her husband, prior to his death, had made a bunch of money in a real estate investment, and that put her name on a list. And so the list got into the wrong hands. People started cold calling her. And at first she was just visiting with them, you know, telling them about her grandchildren, telling them about her family, just little things like that. Well, eventually they started saying, you know, over the course of a couple different phone calls, you know, well, how are you paying, you know, how are your grandkids paying for their college? You said they're college age, you know, and she was like, oh, well, you know, they're having to work. Well, what if, you know, if you invest with us, you'll be able to just pay for their college education. And so she did. And she sent them, you know, I think by the end of it, it was over $300,000 that she had sent these people. And so, I mean, it's that idea that, you know, the more information you provide and that you put out into the space, recognize that can be used against you when it gets into the wrong hands.
Right. And analytics is one of those things.
Yeah.
Absolutely. My search terms, all of that stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just have a question here. $300,000, it seems mind-blowing. It's one thing to lose maybe a couple of thousand, maybe a couple hundred for a bike, you know. But do we have multiple hundred thousands of dollars that are lost from individuals?
I think, you know, particularly for us in the investment space, that's a really big one. You know, we see a lot of people that are, you know, told that if they do something, it's going to be a sure thing. And what we say in the investment realm is there is no such thing as a sure thing. There is no such thing as a risk-free investment. But constantly we're seeing people that are rolling over entire IRA accounts into an investment, you know, are giving hundreds of thousands of dollars or their entire life savings because they've been told, they've been promised, you know, that this is going to multiply their money, that they're going to have, you know, so much more to live off of. But I think even in the general scam space, you know, sometimes it's mind-blowing to think, you know, I heard recently about a woman who was getting called over the IRS scam, right? So this is the scam where they call you and tell you that you owe back taxes. She had been called multiple times about this because once she sent a wire transfer for a couple $1,000s, they realized, ooh, we've got somebody on the hook here, and they just kept calling her. And over the course of a couple weeks, she had sent $40,000. Now, again, when you step into your rational thinking space, there's no way this woman would have owed $40,000 in back taxes, but they were using fear. They were using, you know, all of these emotional tactics against her, and she just wasn't able to kind of get off the hook once she was on it. And so it's that example of, you know, something that initially was a couple $1,000s, that if somebody would have talked to her and said, this is a scam, you know, you don't need to worry about this. They're not going to come to your house. You don't need to be afraid. Yeah. She would have stopped. You know, a couple of weeks later, it had ballooned to something that was really very significant for her.
Yeah, and we had a similar thing happen last week when it comes to timeshare resale scams, which we see a ton of. I want to say last week we spoke to someone who lost like $80,000. And like Jill said, often the way that scammers manipulate people into doing that is that they ask for money incrementally. So in her case, she was presented with a fake offer to sell her timeshare, and it would have been an enormous amount of money. And so first of all, put yourself, it's easy to say, how could you fall for that? But put yourself in her shoes. She was a retired teacher, and she was like, with this amount of money, I could retire. Or, continue my retirement.
Mm-hmm.
And what they did was they asked for some upfront fees, and then they just kept asking for more and more money. And in her mind, eventually she caught on that it was a scam, but it's the sunken cost fallacy where you're like, well, I've already put in this much money, so, giving an incrementally smaller amount, it might be worth it. But yeah, unfortunately, we see people losing a ton of money.
And we've had the Division of Real Estate on here talking about timeshare scams. It is one of the things that the BBB and the Division of Real Estate work on pretty closely with each other because it's so common. Mm-hmm. And, some of these things you think, how fascinating. Timeshare scams, who would have thought? But boy, that's really kind of the nature of scams, is that who would have thought that online dating would have been used as a way to, manipulate the hearts of men and women to give them tens of thousands of dollars. And these are, again, as Jill mentioned, rational, educated, reasonable people.
Yes.
Just caught in a moment of vulnerability, whatever it might be. And it's I think what we're seeing, just easier to be able to catch them because of technology.
Right. And I think, the lesson that we like to leave people with, is unfortunately it comes off a bit doom and gloomy sometimes, but it is the idea that really nobody is invulnerable to this. Especially again, speaking in the investment fraud space, the bulk of victims who fall for these high dollar investment frauds tend to be people who are very highly educated, who are wealthy, or well off financially, who feel that they have a high level of financial literacy, and the very reasons why they would be somebody who would consider themselves invulnerable to falling for a fraud are the reasons why they don't do that extra bit of homework. They don't check out an offering. They don't do that extra piece of due diligence because they think they know better. And so it's that idea that, we have to say, not only are we not invulnerable to scams, anybody can fall for it in the right circumstance. But if it does happen, that's not a reason to be embarrassed. That's not a reason to not report because it really does happen to everybody.
And that's a term that we use a lot, the invulnerability illusion. Mm-hmm. Because when you look at the data of who loses money to scams, a lot of people have this perception that it's all elderly people who aren't familiar with technology and they lose their money in some computer scam that they don't understand. In reality, younger people fall for scams more often. When you look at, the details of how much money people give, it gets a little more complicated. But the bulk of the people, or at least the majority of people losing money to scams they tend to be younger, and it's almost always online, which is the exact demographic that you would think would know exactly how to avoid online fraud.
Yeah. I mean, very good point. I just want to point out that older adults, ages 70 to 79, according to that report, lost an average of $43,000. But when the older adult knew the suspect, the average loss was larger than 50 grand.
Wow.
And that does speak to one of the caveats. So younger people fall for scams more often. Older people, when they give money, tend to give in higher amounts. And again, that speaks to some of the scams we were just talking about, where you see people, giving upwards of hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Well, we have a lot of activities happening for National Consumer Protection Week. I really encourage people to go to our website, askdora.colorado.gov, where we will have a list of the things that we are doing, not only just for consumers, but also for our licensed industries as well. So we really appreciate the time, Alex.
Yes, we appreciate having you. Thank you all so much for joining us for National Consumer Protection Week. And again, visit askdora.colorado.gov.
Good.
Have a wonderful day.